Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another video on my reasons to or not to move to a certain city or state series. In this video, I will actually be covering a city I like, San Francisco. I'm not gonna lie to you, San Francisco was a great city in my opinion, and I've actually had somewhat of an experience living there because my dad actually used to live here. In 2002, my dad unfortunately lost his job here in Oregon, and as a result, from 2002 to 2004, he had unemployment, and he worked some, not a lot, but some temporary jobs from time to time until he landed a job in Palo Alto, which is technically part of San Francisco, but it's actually just outside of San Francisco to the south. Yeah, San Francisco is a great city in my opinion. I really like the fact that it's very metropolitan. I love the Chinatown in San Francisco. I actually visited it when I went there last year. It's a very nice Chinatown, very big, a lot of nice restaurants and cafes there. I love the architecture, buildings like the Transamerica Pyramid, the Salesforce Tower, the 481 Fremont Building, the building that's green and looks almost like the Flatiron Building, and the numerous churches and synagogues all across California. I mean San Francisco make this city one of the best cities I visited recently, even though it's not exactly the best. Yeah, San Francisco is a great city, and I really like it there. However, much like every other city, including the great cities, it has its fair share of problems. And I do mean its fair share of problems. San Francisco might be a great city to live in, but it also has its own cons that could give you a reason not to move there. If you're planning on moving to San Francisco, that's great, but before you do, you should definitely check out my top 5 reasons why you shouldn't move to San Francisco, California. Before I begin, I want to give a huge shout out to World According to Briggs, Nick Johnson, and 601 Travels. Those YouTube channels were the inspirations for me to make videos and a series like this, and I highly recommend you check out their channels as well. I'll leave links in the description below. Number 5, the city's very crowded. Yeah, don't move to San Francisco if you're the type of person who doesn't like crowded cities, because there's a lot of crowds all throughout San Francisco. And now this isn't 100% of the time, but since San Francisco is a tourist hotspot, and since a lot of people are moving into San Francisco, pretty much the same amount of people were moving out of San Francisco, don't expect a day in San Francisco where you're not going to really see anyone. Yeah, San Francisco's pretty crowded and is not the type for people who are claustrophobic or who can't handle crowds. Now, I'm putting this at the bottom of my list because this is actually something I prefer for the city. I prefer a crowded city over a city with absolutely no crowds and no one, because a crowded city shows me that the city is still alive, that there are people still living in the city, that the city is still vibrant, compared to a city with no people, which is pretty much a dead city. I can't imagine going to San Francisco or Portland, my hometown, and seeing absolutely, and I mean absolutely no one in the streets. Well, almost no one, but yeah, like I said, I prefer a crowded city over a dead city. But if you're not the type of person who can handle crowded cities, reconsider moving to San Francisco. Number 4, the traffic in the city is very bad. Yeah, if the fact that, like I said before, the city is very crowded doesn't tell you that the traffic in San Francisco is going to suck, well, now I'm telling you that the traffic in San Francisco sucks. I'm not going to lie to you. It's very crowded, so do expect to be stuck on highways, and while it might be a little bit easier to navigate through than Portland, well, actually maybe not, because Portland is a little bit smaller and doesn't have as bad as drivers as California, based on my understanding. Do expect to be stuck in long lines on the freeway or highway, or to be stuck within the many blocks of downtown San Francisco. But yeah, traffic is terrible, folks. Don't move here if you can't handle being stuck in bad traffic. Number 3, it's very foggy in San Francisco, especially during the summer. Yeah, I was already aware of the fact that San Francisco is very foggy. I knew this before I went back to the city for the first time in 11 years in 2019. However, I was completely unaware of the fact that it does tend to be foggy during the summer months. Yeah, I thought it was all going to be all nice and sunny there like it would be in like Fresno or Los Angeles or other cities in California. And it was sunny there. In fact, out of like the out of the days that I was actually in San Francisco, it was like sunny. 2 of those, like three maybe 4 days I was there. But yeah, San Francisco tends to be very foggy, so keep that in mind when you decide to visit San Francisco. If you want to visit San Francisco and avoid the fogs, then definitely visit them during the fall. That's what my uncle who lives in San Francisco told me. If you're moving to San Francisco, be prepared. You will experience nice and sunny, but also very foggy summers. Number 2, homelessness. Yeah, I did not notice a lot of homeless people when I went to visit San Francisco last year, but I am aware, and it is a no-brainer, that the homelessness and homeless population in San Francisco is a thing, and it's very, very bad there. Yeah, even if it might not exactly be as bad as Los Angeles, from what I heard, Los Angeles currently has a huge problem with homelessness, one that makes the one in San Francisco, Seattle, and Portland look like a joke. But yeah, do keep in mind that the homelessness in San Francisco is actually pretty bad, and do keep this in mind if you decide to visit San Francisco or move there. Number 1, the cost of living in San Francisco. Long story short, when my dad got a job in San Francisco in 2004, he had an apartment that was provided for him by his work. He lived in that apartment, then his work switched him from that apartment to a house that was rentable, and then we switched back to another apartment. And those were actually nice apartments and houses that we technically lived in. They were actually pretty nice. However, when his job no longer offered the apartment or house for him, and when he had to actually go and actually pay to rent out an apartment, he learned the hard way that it's very expensive to live in San Francisco. So expensive that I think it's more like $2,000 to rent a studio apartment in San Francisco or in the surrounding areas like Palo Alto, where my dad lived, San Jose, and probably even Berkeley as well. Yeah, the cost of living in San Francisco, just like the homeless problem and crisis in San Francisco, is a no-brainer. We all know very well that it's very expensive to live in San Francisco. Even if you're just renting an apartment, be prepared to spend a lot of money on renting an apartment, even if it's a very small studio apartment. This was the ultimate reason why we decided not to move with him to San Francisco, even after realizing that he was going to be stuck at that job for a long time. But yeah, unless you have a thick wallet or unless you have a very well-paying job, you want to reconsider moving to San Francisco. And it's not just the price of living there in terms of housing. It's not just the cost of buying a house or renting an apartment. San Francisco also has a very high tax rate as well. And additionally, due to the fact that it's very metropolitan, the fact that a lot of people live there and are moving there, a lot of people visit the city, do expect for it to be very expensive. Usually the cities that have the highest populations or the cities that are visited the most by tourists tend to be very, very expensive in terms of living there. Well, folks, that concludes my 5 reasons why you shouldn't move to San Francisco. Overall, I think it's a great city, actually, like I said in the beginning of this video, and I think it's a great city to live in, and definitely one of the cities you would want to consider visiting if you love beautiful sights, historic buildings, modern cities, big cities, metropolitan cities, and if you love the Chinatown in your hometown, in your home city, I would definitely recommend visiting the Chinatown in San Francisco if you ever visit or move to San Francisco. However, San Francisco is not for everyone, and that's why I made this video on 5 reasons why you shouldn't move to San Francisco. But overall, in my opinion, I think it's a great city, but it does have its reasons why you would want to reconsider moving there. So that's all for today, folks. Stay tuned for more videos. Be sure to subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications.